Great. Thank you. Okay, so welcome, folks. Thanks for joining. 8 a.m. bright and early on a Friday, the third RAC meeting, where we will be discussing OEB's proposed climate-related evaluation criteria. So start off with just a quick round of introductions, and to make things interesting, because it's been somewhat sunny in Corvallis this week, I'm going to say, along with your name and who you represent, if you could give your favorite early spring bloom. And we'll be very liberal in our interpretation of what early spring means. So,
Eric, did you say early spring balloon or
bloom? Bloom. Yes, or balloon.
Because we've had an early spring balloon, but okay.
Thanks, Guy. So my name is Eric Hartstein. I'm OEB's Board and Legislative Policy Coordinator, and I was out in the backyard yesterday, and I saw that our red flowering currant is starting to pop a little bit, and that's always a favorite of mine. So expecting the next couple weeks to see some red or pink flowers there. So next we'll go to Jesse.
Good morning, everybody. Jesse Kirchner, Water and Climate Programs Coordinator at OEB. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say that anymore. I want to apologize. I'm a little bit foggy. I woke up sick and with a bad sore throat. So if I lose track of my thoughts today as I'm speaking, forgive me. I'm not feeling all that well. I don't really know my flowers very well, so I'll just go with daffodils. It's the thing I noticed first coming up. So I don't have anything very interesting to add there. I'm not a plant person. So
thanks, Jesse. Daffodil.
Any sign of spring flowers. Okay. Any sign of spring flowers is good, especially in February.
Okay. All right. Next, we'll go to Alex.
Hi, I'm Alex Rice. I'm a restoration project manager with the North Fork John Day Watershed Council. And I haven't actually seen any since I've lived in Oregon, but I think it's going to be the pasque flower.
Cool. Yeah. All right. Well, welcome, Alex. Next, we'll go Kristen.
Hi, everybody. Kristen Larson, Executive Director of the Lucky Amute Watershed Council in Independence in the Willamette Valley. Like Eric, sort of one of the earlies in spring in the Willamette is osoberry. I love the bright green leaves and the early signs of spring.
Great. Thanks, Kristen. Next, I have Heather on my screen.
Hi, I'm Heather Hendrickson, the District Manager at the Hood River Soil and Water Conservation District. And unlike Jesse, I like all the flowers and I don't know them all super well, but I guess I really like when the fruit trees in the Hood River Valley start blooming.
Definitely. Okay, Bruce.
Yeah, Bruce Taylor. I'm on the Oregon Agricultural Heritage Commission. I really like witch hazel because often it's starting to bloom in January unless you plant it as we did in our backyard in a place where the sun never shines, in which case it never really blooms. But I like grass widows, camas, things like that you see out in the wet meadows.
Definitely. Thanks, Bruce. Next, we'll go to Guy.
Guy Siebert, board member at the Nestucca-Neskowin Sand Lake Watersheds Council. I had daffodils all lined up, Jesse, and I guess living here in the coast, I think when the spring comes and we actually get a lot of sun, the bloom I like is on people's cheeks from getting sun. So rosy cheeks bloom.
I like it. Very creative guy. Next, Dirk, welcome. We're just doing introductions along with your favorite early spring bloom.
Okay. Yeah, sorry I was late and the Zoom was updating for me. So I'm Dirk Renner with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I'm a habitat restoration biologist, primarily with a partners program located in Bend. Probably my favorite spring flower, and it's probably been mentioned, is the crocus because it's the first one I see in the spring.
Good
I
one.
should've got that. Darn.
Yeah. Okay, next, Dallas.
Yeah, I'm Dallas Halder-Fries. I'm the Regenerative Ranching Program Director with Sustainable Northwest. I am driving right now to my family ranch, and there's like a foot of snow on either side of the road, and it's 10 degrees outside. So our spring flowers are still probably 2 months out, unfortunately. So instead of that, I'm going to say what I really do appreciate about February is we have some of the prettiest sunrises, where it's purple and orange and bright pink this time of year. So, yeah.
Yeah, that works just fine, Dallas. Thanks. Anne.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ann Hayden Lesmeister. I'm the in-stream flow specialist with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife in the water program. And I think for me also, early spring bloom is probably the crocus as well, because that's just the first one that I usually see pop up. Although I really get excited, it's not early spring when I start to see the camas along the stream. So.
Yep. Great. Thanks, Anne. And April.
I am like Jesse, and I will say the little purple ones.
Mm-hmm. Perfect. Thanks, April. Okay. So welcome, everybody. And what I'll do now is I'm going to just share my screen real quick and just do a quick review of the agenda. Everybody see that okay? Okay, so done.
Eric, will
welcome
you zoom in a
introduction.
little bit more?
Yep, I never know how big or small
There you
to
go.
make this. Okay,
Thank you.
so we do not have any public comments that was submitted in advance of the meeting today. So we'll go after this right to pulling up the third draft of the rule language. It'll be, I think, a pretty quick touch. We want to spend a good chunk of time discussing the draft guidance that was also sent out and how that incorporates the criteria. Then we'll spend more time back after that on the draft rules. We have some flexibility if we move through the guides pretty quickly. If folks want to spend additional time on the draft rules, we can do that. We have a little discussion on the adverse impacts to small businesses. We could actually probably just change this to fiscal impacts discussion, as I think that's probably more accurate. And then have wrap up and next steps. And included along with that is, if you all think, we all think that we need future meeting or future meetings after this one. So we'll have everybody out of here by 11. Okay, any questions on the agenda? Not seeing any. Okay, so we'll just pop, and maybe I'll even put up if folks are amenable, I can put up the third draft of the rule. Actually, Jesse, do you mind if you to put up the third draft of the rules? Awesome.
Is that good?
Yeah, I think that looks great.
Okay.
Okay, so think what we want to do here is just walk through the changes made to the draft rules following the last RAC meeting. Really just a light touch at this point. Maybe just ask for clarifying questions. And then we'll have time to go into these a little bit deeper after we go through the guidance. So that no folks will have some suggested edits, and maybe just ask if you hold off on those suggested edits until we're done going through the guidance. So just the changes that were made at following the last RAC meeting. So in subsection 1 there, we removed, there was a where appropriate at the end of that, and we basically changed that to wherever possible and moved it into that bit of the preamble there. Thanks, Jesse. In section 2, we removed, there was reference to project design and implementation. So just kept that as project, added durable adaptation. So the term durable to adaptation. And then we had a discussion last time around kind of natural resources and or ecosystems. We basically just we removed natural resources and just kept that ecosystems language in there, including the human communities. In subsection 3, we did quite a bit of modification here, where we actually removed the direct reference to mitigation, and we'll get to that here in a second when we get to definitions, and replaced it with consideration of greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And noted how that these will inform the project. So that's probably the place where we did the most changes to the rules. So we get into the definitions. So
Eric.
Yeah.
This guy. I just one quick question. I don't know what it struck me when reading these on number 2. Do people read at the end when we talk about adaptation and resilience for ecosystems, including human communities, that we are saying that human communities are an ecosystem? Or my brain went to saying that resilience for ecosystems and human communities. But it's just, I guess, how you read it. But if you don't read it that we're saying human communities are ecosystems, then I think we're okay.
Yeah, I think maybe the operative word there would be the including part.
Not including, but and. I would just say and instead of including, because including makes it sound like human communities are part of the ecosystems that we're just describing earlier.
Well, let's think about that as we go
Sure.
to the
I just
yeah, because we did have a discussion, if I recall, around, human communities are a part of the ecosystem, but let's table that, I think, for now, and get into that once
Sure.
we get into after we go through the guidance. So in the definitions, for adaptation, we removed modifying and, so we just have the process of adjusting instead of process of modifying and adjusting. Added a definition for durable. Added a definition for local communities disproportionately impacted by climate change. And then added definitions for carbon sequestration and storage, as well as a couple of alternate definitions for you all to chew on. And then mitigation, we have an alternate there. However, as Guy pointed out to us yesterday, we removed the direct reference to mitigation in the draft criteria. So, one option, and we'll discuss this after we get through the guidance, but we could remove the definition for mitigation, or if we want to go back in and include mitigation somewhere up in the criteria. And resilience stayed the same for definitions. Okay, so any clarifying questions on the changes that were made? Okay, not hearing any. Let's move briefly away from the rules and we'll hop into the guidance. Jesse, I'm stand ready to take over at any point.
Thanks, Eric. Okay, so we just put together a PowerPoint to walk through some of the examples that were provided in the guidance, just to give everybody a chance to ask questions and sort of talk through how these criteria look like, what they look like in practice, if we think about including them in the grant application questions, and what example responses look like. So we're just going to spend quite a bit of time walking through some of the different examples in that large document that was posted for everybody and sent to everybody last week. Let's see if I can get this to be up. There we go. So just really quick, we just walked through this, but the draft climate criteria that we have right now, here's the 3 different ones. The first looking at engagement with local communities disproportionately impacted by climate change. The second looking at how changing climate conditions are incorporated into the project and how the project will contribute to durable adaptation and resilience, and then how consideration of greenhouse gas emissions reductions or long-term carbon sequestration or storage has informed the project. So here's our 3 draft climate criteria. And one of the things that we wanted to do very quickly is just to reflect back on the rulemaking considerations and what we heard from the public listening sessions. So these are the 9 sort of key themes or takeaways that were brought up from those public listening sessions and the survey and everything that we did last spring. And so I want to walk through these, and I want you to think about them in terms of what we've created already with the draft climate criteria. And as we go through the guidance and examples, we're going to come back to these at the end, and then we can think about if there's some that we feel like we've maybe not addressed or that we might be missing and we need to think about a little bit more. So the first consideration was to develop broad evaluation criteria. Folks, as part of that session, brought up that there needs to be more flexibility in terms of what kinds of improvements or enhancements are helpful, and it will allow for a diversity of ways to achieve climate mitigation and adaptation benefits. So there was a request to have these broad evaluation criteria. The second was to maximize all project benefits. So thinking about what criteria maximize natural resource, human, community, and climate benefits, while also minimizing the burden on grant applicants. So in a little bit, I'll walk through examples of what our existing evaluation criteria look like and how the climate criteria fit into that. And then also, as you look at the guidance and things, think about the burden for grant applicants. So how can we find that balance between helping projects optimize and track beneficial mitigation and adaptation impacts without taking away from the ecological project benefits that OWEB has always prioritized. The next consideration was to start qualitative and move to quantitative. So we've heard this time and again, that just quantifying emissions reductions, carbon sequestration and storage, and adaptation and resilience benefits is a significant challenge. So really asking applicants to provide qualitative descriptions of what those benefits or what those trade-offs might be rather than anything quantitative. The next is to consider trade-offs associated with mitigation-based criteria. So this is really just thinking around whatever criteria we develop that get at things like consideration of greenhouse gas emissions reductions or long-term carbon sequestration and storage. We're recognizing that some project activities may have some carbon impacts in the short term, but will ultimately lead to greater benefits down the long term. So the example that kept coming up was prescribed fire, where it releases carbon in the short term, but it would also lessen the chance of catastrophic wildfire, which would ultimately release more carbon down the line. The next is to be clear about definitions and expectations of applicants. So needing to build a shared understanding of terminology and provide guidance and resources in defining our expectations, including what we consider as good answers to different questions. The next consideration is to re-examine, or that these criteria provide an opportunity to re-examine potential project longevity or modify projects using a climate lens. So the climate criteria an opportunity to help us re-examine our current practices and modify our projects to better address climate impacts, become more efficient, or revise our priorities. The seventh consideration was that flexibility is key. So this feeds into a little bit around the broad evaluation criteria, but in this context, it was more about trying to establish a feedback loop between grant applicants, partners, stakeholders at OWEB to see what's working as we implement these climate criteria and what's not working, and then make changes accordingly. The next rulemaking consideration is to put traditionally underrepresented and impacted communities at the table with decision-making power, and that's as part of the rulemaking process, but also in the kinds of criteria that we ask or put in here. And then the ninth was potentially the importance of developing and applying a predetermined equity lens to help prioritize funding to community members who are being impacted first and most significantly by climate change. So just reflect on these, think about them as we go through the examples and the criteria that we've created so far, and just if there's things that really stand out to you as we go through this or at the end, be sure to flag it for us. So just a little bit more context for today. So at the end of our last Climate RAC meeting, y'all asked if we would provide some example guidance for some of our grant programs, in particular restoration, stakeholder engagement, technical assistance, monitoring, and land acquisition. So Eric Hartstein and I spent some time over the last month or so trying to pull out where we saw the climate criteria fitting into existing grant application questions for these different programs, and then looking at how the guidance could be modified and to provide some examples of what responses would look like. So today what we want to do is just walk through examples of what integrating these climate criteria in our grant programs looks like. I'm going to show you some of our existing bubble diagrams, which many of you may be familiar with. This is like the criteria that OWEB uses currently to evaluate projects. And then we'll look through application questions, guidance, and example responses. The purpose in doing this is really just for us to demonstrate how the criteria can be translated into grant application questions and guidance. So it's hard to know when these are so broad, what that actually looks like in practice. So that's the purpose of doing this today, is really, what does this look like in practice? Does it make sense? What are the challenges that you see? And what is the kind of, the type or level of content that we might be looking for in the applicant response to these kinds of criteria? So now we're going to start with the restoration grant program, and I'm going to walk through our existing bubble diagrams and some examples, and we'll pause there, and then we'll just spend some time if there's discussion points or things that people like this flag for people as we went through it. So here's our current restoration, what we call our bubble diagrams, where a grant application comes in and it's evaluated according to these different bubbles. So proposal clarity, cost effectiveness, the capacity of the applicant, the watershed context, and the technical soundness. So we say that that sweet spot is where a project hits at all of those different bubbles within that bubble diagram. So these are our existing evaluation criteria, and I'll walk through these in a little bit more detail. So for watershed context, the evaluation criteria looks at things like, does the project consider likely impacts to the site and its adjacent properties? What's the public awareness leading to the restoration? Does the project fit within the context of past and future restoration efforts? Does the project address watershed function and ecosystem processes? And is it in a prioritized geography and a watershed restoration plan? So again, our current applications are evaluated by these different criteria. So proposal clarity, is the project ready to implement? Has it been clearly defined and appropriate methods described? Does it clearly state the objectives and describe how those will be met? The technical soundness, does it treat the causes rather than the symptoms? Does it identify and evaluate possible alternatives? Have the watershed benefits been adequately quantified? For capacity of applicant, does it engage the appropriate partners? Is there capacity for long-term stewardship and maintenance? Have past projects been completed successfully? And do they have a proven track record for managing projects? And then lastly, the cost effectiveness. So does the budget have that return on investment for the watershed benefit? And are there reasonable direct costs and rates? So again, that sweet spot is where, a grant application comes in and it hits these different criteria within these bubbles. So when we look at adding climate criteria, it's getting added as just another bubble. So we're adding a 6th bubble to a 5-bubble diagram, where we would ask people, these projects be evaluated against these criteria. So what is engagement with local communities disproportionately impacted by climate change? Has consideration of greenhouse gas emissions reductions and carbon sequestration and storage informed the project, or how has it informed the project? How does the project contribute to durable adaptation and resilience benefits? And then how has the incorporation of climate change been considered in the project? So it's just adding, again, one more bubble to what we already have. And so what you're looking at instead of 5 is just this 6, and it's going to be part of that sweet spot now, is where you have evaluation of climate criteria fitting in to evaluation against all these other criteria. All right, Kristen, I'll stop there.
Sorry, can you go back real quick? So your climate bubble had 4 bullets and we have 3 criteria. I was trying to figure out what got where.
Oh, the last 2 are criteria number 2, and I just separated them out into 2 different dots because of spacing issues, and it was easier to just have them. Yeah,
trying to keep up. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so now
Jesse,
we're going to look at,
Jesse, this is Guy. Just a general question, and this, we may have talked about this before, and I apologize for it, but who determines what the climate? Let's go back to the climate change. So we, on the last bullet is, does it incorporate incorporation of climate change in project? Are the OWEB evaluators sitting with some kind of description of what climate change is going to be for that particular geography? In other words, if you're and it's something that you're going to distribute. So if our council submits a plan, you already have a description of what climate change is going to do to the central coast of Oregon or something. I mean, where do we get that description, and whose description is it? Is it something that we have to find, or something OWEB's going to provide, or?
Yeah, so I mean, the bubble diagram, know that I just was trying to shorten and fit the criteria into it. So it's not going to be exactly worded, but that's why I put this slide back up of like how the criteria are exactly worded. But that piece is how changing climate conditions are incorporated into the project. So OWEB, I think our plan is to provide technical resources that will allow you to find that climate change information for different watersheds and regions within Oregon, so that you aren't necessarily going to have to go out there and do all of that research on your own. But really what we're asking you to do here is to be thoughtful about, what does climate impacts look like for your region? What are the impacts of concern based on what you're trying to accomplish? And then what have you done to try to address what those concerns might be in your project. So like,
Right.
for
I understand.
example, yeah.
Yeah, and I understand that. I just want to make sure that the climate change that we are addressing is the same that the OWEB, that OWEB is seeing the same thing. In other words, we're all on the same page.
Well, I think I would think about this as like, your geography best. I realize there's climate science that's out there, but when it comes to you describing like what the historic like land use challenges are in your project geography, or like what are the current pressures that you're already facing in your geography, the regional review team members don't necessarily have that context of like what they don't have a background document that says like in the NSTECA these are the current challenges, and so are they talking about those challenges? Climate is the same, right? Like we're asking you to find and we'll provide information on climate, but like your geography the best, and there will be information that's provided across like in terms of technical resources that like is consistent for our reviewers and for you. But
Right.
this is just another piece of like, I'm not being sorry again, sick and feeling a little foggy. But
Well, I apologize. Yeah,
just,
I understand. So it's all, I think in general, we're all going to be on the same page in terms of, I mean, you're going to respect the opinions of the local watershed council or district or whatever it is, in terms of knowing its own watersheds. But there is going to be some common understanding that we all agree to as to what that climate change is going to be generally for particular regions.
right. I think it would be, I don't know that this would happen, but like if somebody came in and said like, we're expected to see temperatures lower in this geography, whereas like all the science says that it's going to be increasing, I don't know that would, but I will say that whatever technical resources that we provide will be like uniformly provided to our reviewers as well as to our applicants. We wouldn't be inconsistent in that.
Okay, thank you. Okay.
Bruce has his hand up.
Yeah, I'm assuming that this is one of those cases where there is no single correct answer, that we are just asking applicants to demonstrate that they thought about this and show the reviewers how how that thinking informed their way they put forward the project there. But Dirk's on a regional review team, right? Or has been? I mean, I'd be interested in his perspective on that.
Yeah, I know. I was just giving you a thumbs up reaction for that comment because I think that's going to be the case. It's going to be, people who are on review teams are going to try and use the best information that they have. There's not going to be a set standard for each watershed that's going to be agreed upon in advance.
Yeah, thanks, Dirk.
Did I keep going, or is there? Yeah, I wasn't sure. You rubbed your face. I didn't know if that was an exasperation. Or if that was...
No, I was just trying to, I don't know what I was trying to do. I was thinking.
Process.
Go ahead.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. Okay, so now we're going to look at the restoration grant application, thinking about it from the context of integrating these two draft climate criteria. So asking how changing climate conditions are incorporated to the project and how consideration of greenhouse gas emissions reductions has informed the project. So this is a current application question in our restoration application, which gets at design, and it says, describe the design alternatives that were considered and why the preferred alternative was selected. So the guidance for response, the text that's in black is the current guidance that's in our grant application. And then the highlighted yellow is where we've proposed to add in these climate criteria as part of that guidance. So the current guidance reads an explanation of design alternatives helps reviewers understand how the project was developed and what range of solutions was considered. No action alternatives should be described, as well as alternatives with different technical or conceptual approaches. Reviewers need to get a clear understanding of why a specific design was chosen over other options. So as part of your response, discuss how climate impacts, as well as consideration of greenhouse gas emissions reductions, informed design alternatives and the selection of the preferred alternative. So what we've tried to do is not necessarily modify, in a lot of cases, not necessarily modify the question itself, but just add these climate criteria in as part of what they need to respond to in their answer to that question. And then Eric, I'm going to have you read the example response just to give my throat a break.
Yeah, no problem. Maybe before I start reading, Bruce, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I like the construction here, the informed, the way the project's designed and all that. You know, in our rule language, we say incorporated. You know, I don't know that, you know, from a strict grammatical standpoint that you incorporate climate into your project. You incorporate consideration of it, but I like the informed way it's used in here, and maybe we should think about that for the actual rule language.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. I'll also say here before I start reading that OWEB is also streamlining our grant application process, or the grant applications themselves. So we're both, I think, at a good point and a little bit in limbo, where on one side we're developing, we're looking at the grant applications, seeing what questions can be removed as, you know, potentially redundant. And we're also, you know, potentially adding a few questions with the goal in mind to streamline everything. So, you know, just want to make perfectly clear that the guidance we have here is reflected on the existing grant application. Jesse and I are pretty sure that the questions that we included here will be included in some form in the new application. So we feel comfortable moving forward with it now, but just for full disclosure that these questions might change in some form, but the responses and the guidance won't, in I think any substantive way, change. Okay, so for the example response here, we have project proponents considered a no action alternative, which would maintain the degraded stream reach of Tyler Creek that provides little watershed resiliency in an environment that is changing rapidly due to climate change. The project proponents also considered an alternative that included just riparian restoration, which would be less expensive and results in fewer greenhouse gas emissions. That is because there would be no need for heavy equipment, but the aquatic benefits to this alternative would only be realized many years in the future as the vegetation matures and begins to provide stream shade and eventually contribute large wood to provide complexity. The preferred alternative includes use of excavators to re-meander Tyler Creek and place large wood. This will provide an almost immediate benefit to in-stream habitat and improve watershed resilience in the face of climate change by enhancing its ability to retain water as well as dissipate stream flow energy. To help mitigate for the greenhouse gas emissions, we will require contractors to use biodiesel with their excavators, and will source the large wood from our U.S. Forest Service partners at a site less than a mile from the project location, which will also reduce travel costs. Phew. So, questions on this example response? Okay, not seeing any.
I guess
I'd be curious.
I've got a
Okay,
question.
go ahead, Dirk.
Some of this assumes the knowledge of the reviewers about the effect of biodiesel on greenhouse emissions, and I understand the we require that in excavators in case there's a spill, but I'm not exactly certain how the use of biodiesel actually reduces other greenhouse emissions. Is it just the production of biodiesel? I thought the production of biodiesel was actually fairly costly from a production standpoint. So it's asking some, it's a response that we have to review as a reviewer that I would not necessarily feel I've got. I appreciate it. Would be, if I saw this, I'd appreciate the effort from the applicant to try and address the question, but I would also have some questions about the reviewers, and this maybe goes back to Guy's earlier comment about us all working from kind of a same template. So I guess that's my thought on this. Is like, yeah, I appreciate the thought, and it looks like they're attempting to answer the question, but I'm not sure I've got the skill set to adequately know if the answer is appropriate.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think it's a good question, Dirk. My understanding is that when you compare diesel to biodiesel, the biodiesel has less greenhouse gas emissions. I could stand corrected there, but I think it does go to the larger point of it would be good for OWEB to have, or to point folks to some guidance for both the applicants and reviewers.
Eric,
Yeah, go ahead, Guy.
Scott, I'm sorry, I should raise my hand. I'm sorry, but so in this statement by the Tyler Creek folk, the project, it just makes a general reference to say that we're providing watershed resiliency in an environment that is changing rapidly due to climate change. I could see everybody using that same phrase. And I'm not sure exactly what that means for this particular watershed, and what rapid change versus gradual change versus whatever means. But I could just, my concern is that everybody will just tack on that phrase and consider that we're covering the criteria. And we're not really going to discuss what that climate change is, what changes specifically it may bring to the watershed. Do you understand? I guess, and it gets back to my original thing. I mean, it's like, do we all commonly understand what rapid climate change is for Tyler Creek?
So thanks, Guy. I'll respond, but I'm curious what other folks think on this as well. The example response notes that this is an environment that is rapidly changing. So Tyler Creek is included in that. I don't think we're looking specifically at what is happening specifically in the Tyler Creek watershed due to climate change, knowing that science might change in the future. There might be the ability to drill down and say, we know what's happening in this small watershed, and we could, with strong degree of confidence, predict what's going to happen in 10, 20, 50 years down the line. I think what we heard in the listening sessions last spring was that folks were really kind of concerned that we would be requiring them to know this information right now, that the information exists on, to use the Tyler Creek example, how climate change is impacting this fictional small watershed specifically. And we just didn't think that we were there quite yet. So with the broader understanding here of, yeah, that we're living in a rapidly changing environment due to climate change. And I don't know if there's going to be too much pushback on that at that broad level, but I'm curious what other folks think. I see a lot of hands up.
Well,
I don't know if that was.
And Eric, I just want to jump in and remember, this is one question in a whole slew of application questions. And there's another question that asks to describe the climate changes and impacts to the watershed. So in this particular response, this is only specific to this one design alternative. Theoretically, they would have responded in an earlier question to what climate changes and impacts are in the watershed. So it's for Eric and I, we can't like throw everything into the response, this one response, because it's supposed to be addressed in other places as well. So
Okay.
just, I wanted to throw that in as a clarifier.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it is being addressed, just not here, and what that climate change is doing to this particular watershed.
I think there's a question on it, example in the guidance, but I'll see if I can't find it and pull it or in there. But I see Kristen shaking her head. Maybe she sees it on her screen.
I think it's the problem statement one, where you asked the very first one in the restoration guidance that you all sent us. Describe the problems to be addressed is the regular question that's always been there. And then as part of the guidance, as part of your response, discuss relevant climate changes and impacts on the watershed. So I think that's where you would ask to describe what we're thinking of. But I think this is a really important point in general. Sort of Eric's answer gets at, you know, if on one side of the coin, the thinking is the science isn't quite there, or we're thinking really broadly, and we're saying, you know, in general, these are the things we're seeing, or like Guy says, making sure we're all on the same page. But at the same time, you know, in the second half of this answer, it's saying, oh, but these are the benefits we're going to provide, you know, resilience in the face of climate change by enhancing its ability to retain water and dissipate energy. So it's almost like flip sides of the coin. And I think this will just come up through the thing. And it gets at, Jesse, you framed really well in what was heard in the listening session is clarity on expectations. What is the level that is being expected of folks? And if an example is, you know, and again, there's other examples here, pretty high level and broad, great, but what's getting accomplished from that? Because I feel like most folks are actually already doing that in some way, and maybe they're not, and that could be some education. But I'm not saying I want to make it harder for everybody. I'm just saying sort of like that clarity of expectation is just super important, and this for me sort of muddies the water that we went through this whole process and resolutions and RAC and criteria to just sort of say, we're thinking about it and this will help. So I just think that's a huge overarching point, which is why the guidance is so helpful and important, I think, for us to look at and talk about.
Yeah, I think
Thanks, Kristen.
I'm agreeing with everything everybody is saying. I think the thing that's really tough here is that we're trying to prioritize climate benefits against ecosystem benefits, and you know, what takes precedence there. And then also I think it's difficult balancing, you know, like in an example like this, I'd be interested to know how many man hours or how many gallons of biodiesel they're expecting to have to use on a project like this, you know. But that can oftentimes be like just an arbitrary question, because it's tough to estimate that sometime for our project partners, and they may not know unless they have a contractor on hand, or they don't really know until they get out there. And so I guess my point is I think we really have to rely on the discretion of the reviewers. And I think OWEB does a good job on getting local experts who are as up to date on the science as possible and up to date on the real life impacts in those regions as possible. Because if we were to strictly look at this from a climate lens, it would be hard not to say, well, they should go the passive route where they just let vegetation grow because there's going to be way less emissions. But how do we actually quantify the difference in the amount of carbon uptake in that slower example versus the carbon uptake in a more faster example where potentially more vegetation is growing, more carbon is being sucked in, and there's other habitat benefits. And so it's just, I think it's really hard in this sense from a RAC perspective to not be caught in the weeds, but I just think it's a really tough place to be in currently because we don't have the tools or the capacity to really know what the climate impacts are on a project like this.
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Dallas.
So just given that, I'd be curious, I know some of these are grayed out. When you think about the criteria and the points that folks brought up, does this change how these things should be phrased or what we're asking with these criteria?
This is Kristen. I appreciate starting light and broad, how it informed, how you're considering, because of what Dallas, the tools, the capacity to do this are incredibly difficult. They're fuzzy. The diversity of interpretation people will have, and some folks might take sort of this, example approach. It'll get hotter. We're picking different plants. Planting plants will help. Boom. Versus like trying to actually go online and do a calculator and da-da-da-da-da. And like that's not where you're going with the applicants, is having this whole spectrum of endeavor and investment and answers, and then how does the review team compare that? So I appreciate this. I don't want to make our lives harder, yet trying to accomplish what we're all trying to already accomplish. But it's kind of what, this is an OWEB driven thing. What do you want? And be clear and consistent, I think is the thing. So how, I'm in favor of sort of the lighter, broader touch at this point. How are you considering? How are you incorporating? How are you planning? But just being clear on what's the level of expectation for the applicants, for the review team, so the apples are compared to apples and all of that. So I think but it's what are you trying to get at? So that doesn't answer anything, but that's where I'm at.
So maybe I'll ask, thanks, Kristen. Maybe I'll ask you a question in response. Do you think that this draft guidance that we've put out, does that give you an idea of what we're wanting? Or is there something here that's not clear if you were writing a application?
Yeah, I think it goes back to Guy's point of like it's a light touch. It's not really detailed. If I was writing a response, with this kind of project, I would go a little deeper. And I know you're trying to be concise, and this is all very preliminary and draft and everything too. It's things we've already. This is kind of back to the original. We're already doing this, so that's part of the frustration in the whole process. Is like we were already doing plant selection on this. We're already doing these things. Anything that's helpful to reduce greenhouse gases, reduce costs for the contractors. So we're already doing that. So we've already been, talking about these things in a little more detail than this. So yeah, this is pretty high level, and you're going to get if that's your guidance, you're probably going to get pretty general answers, or maybe a little more detail specific to your region. Like I was saying, Willamette's going to be dry or hotter. We're going to modify our plant species selections, and we're working on shade and storing water. And if that's what you're looking for, that's what you're probably going to get in response to seeing guidance like this. So,
Thanks.
I'm thinking too that it seems, and I'm trying to, and this may be a simple way of thinking about it, but we're going to put a project together, and it's going to what we're trying to do is the result, because of we're going to describe to OWEB what our general climate predictions are for here on the North Coast, and we're trying to make our watershed more resilient and to adapt to the changes that we see. And we're all going to, we're going to describe roughly, and we might have a template that we say, here's what, the best guidance we have from the state of Oregon in terms of what climate is going to be, the climate changes that are going to occur here. So we're going to try to make this project, the purpose of our project is to make this watershed more resilient and to adapt to the changes that are coming. So that kind of is like the first piece and then the next piece is, in doing so, how are we trying to impact that climate change by reducing greenhouse gases in this project? In some ways, in my mind, that's secondary. So I know there's a sweet spot. We kind of do the Venn thing, and there is a sweet spot in the middle. But I think that the actual project to make it more resilient and to adapt to the change weighs more heavily in my mind than, we're going to use less gas or whatever in getting this thing done. And maybe that's a wrong way of thinking it, but I just think the priority is the watershed and making the various ecosystems that we are trying to make healthier and prepare them for the future. To me, that's the priority. Yes, and I think consider all the other things that we're doing to reduce what we're doing in terms of emissions. That's in some ways secondary. Not that it shouldn't be considered, but if I were a reviewer, or are we weighing these things equally?
Yeah, thanks for popping that up, Jesse.
Yeah.
This is Anne. Since that was just said, I wanted to jump in and say I definitely agree with this. I feel like we're getting a little bit hung up on this one criteria. And I know that you've said before that we're not weighting them. And it's certainly, I think that the language and the guidance as far as how to consider it is fine. But I do agree that the other grayed out pieces that we were looking at earlier probably are the more important pieces of this. And I think as reviewers are looking at projects, if it's a good project, it should be abundantly clear if the expected benefits are going to outweigh the emissions that are being directly associated with the particular restoration effort. And so, again, I think it's certainly important things to consider and to have some guidance as to how to answer that. But I agree with Guy's point that some of the other aspects are really the more important things to consider.
Okay. Thank you, Anne. Heather, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I'm glad you put this back up, Jesse, because the first bullet point there about engagement with disproportionately impacted communities, do we need to address that in the example there at all? Or is that addressed somewhere else?
It would be addressed in a different question.
Okay.
Yeah, so
Okay.
I didn't mean to cause confusion by highlighting. I was just trying to point to which parts of the criteria we were going to focus on in the example, but all of these criteria would be addressed in the restoration grant application. I'm So sorry
Okay.
if I
Oh, no,
if
no,
that
that's
like
okay.
caused a point of confusion. But
And
they would be, the idea is that every single criteria that's in here would be addressed at some point in the application. I was just trying to highlight the example we're providing right now
Yeah.
and talking about these two aspects. Yeah.
And I guess just on the question of, we're starting really broad, and then, maybe as time goes on and we learn more and get more information, I just, I feel like these criteria, the responses aren't measurable, time sensitive, SMART objectives. And so I just wonder if OWEB, if you're trying, if you're going to try to wrap this all up into some reporting at some point, or is having these kinds of responses going to be useful information to say, hey, we've addressed climate change and here's how. There's really nothing concrete from that example to necessarily pull out, which may be fine, but maybe something to think about, getting at a more specific question. But I realize not everyone's going to be there, or how do we calculate that? So I do like the broad approach, but it's just going to be hard to sort of wrap up into a, like, here's what was accomplished on the climate lens through OWEB's investment in the year or whatever across the state.
Yeah, it's not as easy to kind of roll up as we do for reporting on, say, like salmon or steelhead restoration metrics and the number of riparian acres. And it's, I think you all are hitting on kind of one of the primary challenges that we're dealing with.
But I think there are ways to describe a project. If we're doing encouraging beaver habitat at an upper reach of a watershed and other kinds of things, we can specifically say that here's what we're doing because the climate change predictions for this area are hotter, drier summers. We're going to get the same amount of rain. We're going to get 110 inches here, and but it's going to come over a shorter period of time. Storage is going to be an issue. We can outline several of those things, and then we can say, and here's how our project is going to address water temp, storage, other habitat changes that are going to occur, changes in species, other kinds of things. We can be more specific. I guess what I was reacting to in the earlier thing is, everybody's going to use this phrase that, we're going to respond to climate change, or whatever, the project responds to climate change. I think you can be specific in the project description and link the things that you're doing to the changes that are expected to come. But my brain then went, when just a minute ago, to how would we do this with a fish passage barrier project? Are those going to become less important? But I don't know. But other kinds of restoration stuff, I do think it's possible to be more specific. And so my kind of objection to the Tyler Creek, and God, I went searching for where Tyler Creek was, and then now Eric said it was fictional. But my objection is just it was the part of climate thing was just covered by a phrase. It wasn't tied to anything.
Well, yeah, I'd say I keep chewing on that guy, and remember it's one example from one question.
Right.
We're just
understand. We should probably go through the whole thing and then go back, I think.
Yeah, but before we move on, it's Kristen. I do see your hand is up.
I think, thanks. Back to, and I know I'm not trying to wordsmith guidance, but I think back to Guy's point on the watershed ecosystem benefits versus greenhouse gas reduction. And so even thinking about that in the red text in the guidance, as part of your response. No, you were on it, Jesse. Sorry, or the yellow highlight on the PowerPoint. Sorry, I'm looking at what you sent on my other screen here. discuss how climate impacts as well as consideration of greenhouse gas emissions inform design alternatives, and almost discuss how climate impacts as well as, I want to go back to the criteria, contributions to durable adaptation and resilience inform design alternatives. Like what are you emphasizing in your guidance? In this language, you're really emphasizing number 3 rather than number 2. That's just one thought on that.
I think that's super helpful, Kristen. And I think for at least for me, as I went through this, it was like trying to figure out, because I guess I had heard that in our current applications, there's a lot of redundancy. And so I'm trying to balance like that perspective of like, we're already in another question, you might be talking about adaptation and resilience benefits. And so trying to figure out how you weave these criteria in where applicants don't feel like they're providing the same answer over and over again is really challenging. And so that was a really good point to bring up, where it's like, I could put that in here, but then it's like, well, now you're fitting all of it into one response, but again, it's going to be and talk about, so it's just this weird trade-off and trying to figure out where these integrate, where it makes sense that they integrate, and where they're going to, across the application, you're going to get a holistic picture of how they're thinking about these climate criteria, and like how we balance that with like making applicants not feel like they're responding to the same thing over and over and having to write the same response.
Thank you for that. And yeah, I mean, like this is the first question we're looking at. So, but I really appreciate that mindset. And then Eric's comment earlier that there's a whole other effort to streamline the application in general. So I think any opportunity to do that is welcome and appreciated, and yeah, supported. Right.
Okay, I think we're ready to move on.
New project type. Stakeholder engagement. All right. So current stakeholder engagement bubble diagram. I'm not going to go through what the existing criteria look like in any detail like I did for restoration, but just know that our current stakeholder engagement grant applications are evaluated based on these 5 different sort of bubbles, and then there's criteria within them looking at cost effectiveness, the applicant, the timeliness, the technical soundness, and the stakeholders. And so again, just as climate would be added as another bubble into it with the same, as what we had listed in the restoration one. And so in this particular example, I'm only going to focus on this number 2 criteria and how it could be integrated into one question. So the current application question for stakeholder engagement is related to the goals and objectives of the project. So it asks you to describe the direct correlation the stakeholder engagement effort will have with future restoration or acquisition activities. As applicable, describe how the resulting project or outcome will protect or restore fish or wildlife habitat, watershed function, and water quality or quantity. And we added or contribute to durable adaptation and resilience for ecosystems or long-term carbon sequestration and storage. So what you can see is that it's really asking more about that second part of the criteria, although in the guidance we have asking them to discuss climate changes and impacts. So the guidance for response is to describe the direct correlation the stakeholder engagement effort will have with future restoration or acquisition activities, including how climate changes and impacts have been considered in these activities. As applicable, describe how the resulting project or outcome will protect or restore fish or wildlife habitat, watershed function, and water quality or quantity, or contribute to durable adaptation or resilience for ecosystems or long-term carbon sequestration or storage. So in the question, we had to integrate those other benefits that we wanted to highlight, and then the guidance asks a little bit more in terms of both aspects of that second criteria. And then Eric, I'll let you read the example again. So it's good system.
Okay. So the example here is this stakeholder engagement project will directly support the reduction of stream temperature along Alder Creek by enlisting landowners and planting efforts along 4 miles of stream. Climate change is projected to lead to increased summer stream temperatures in the watershed, with implications for juvenile coho growth and survival. Planting efforts will focus on species likely to succeed given projected future climate conditions. For example, those species adapted to warmer temperatures and variable water availability. Planting riparian vegetation, more likely to succeed given climate change, helps maintain lower stream temperatures, directly benefiting aquatic species such as Oregon coast coho salmon, as well as sequestering and storing more carbon over the long term. Okay, so again, this is just one question in a stakeholder engagement application. The guidance document that we have available and up on the website goes into more details on this as well as the other project types.
And I think that's a really good, to me, that's a good response. You know, the applicant is both telling you about why they're doing it, what they expect in the climate change in that particular area, and what they're doing is going to mitigate that, or not mitigate, well, to adapt to that.
Great, thanks, Guy. Other thoughts on this one? Yeah, go ahead, Kristen.
It's not exactly on this one. I didn't realize we were going to do like one example question from each application type. So I don't know where my comment fits, so feel free to just park it for a bit. But I'm struggling with the criteria number 1, the meaningfully engage local communities disproportionately impacted by climate change as it's incorporated throughout the guidance and examples. I feel like you've touched on the local communities disproportionately impacted by climate change part of that criteria, but not meaningfully engage, even to the point where I would challenge us to define that in the criteria definitions. And that throughout these examples, I would argue what the questions are asking and what the guidance, the examples offer is not meaningful engagement in many examples. So, so I'd love to talk about that at some point, and I don't know where it fits into today's meeting.
I think, well, I mean, yeah.
I was just going to say thanks, Kristen, and I think that came up with one of our other folks that couldn't make it today. Also commented about the meaningful engagement, and if we are going to say meaningful, we need to define that, and that needs to be clarified somehow, because it's not right now. It's not clear. So another RAC member provided a similar comment to that effect. Eric, should I move on, or are we taking a break sometime? I don't know what we're doing.
I'd say we try to make it through the guidance, then we'll take a break if it pleases the RAC, and then we can go getting back to the draft rules, if that works for folks.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll move on to monitoring. Yeah, sorry, Kristen, I wanted to show snapshots from each one since people asked to see examples from each. So I thought we'd walk through each program, but yeah, it's a good flag, and I appreciate that comment. Hopefully we'll have some time to dive into that after this. So for monitoring, our current bubble diagram, the criteria look at cost effectiveness of monitoring projects, proposal clarity, technical soundness, and capacity. And then again, climate just being another component to that. So here we're going to look at the third climate criteria, how consideration of greenhouse gas emissions reductions has informed the project. And I'll just say that the examples that I'm highlighting here were ones that folks flagged at the end of the last meeting. Like, I'd love to see like criteria number 3 for monitoring and criteria number 1 for restoration. And so that's why I've tried to stick to what folks identified at the end of the last meeting. That's why they're in like kind of a funky order. And I was like, why'd you pick that? And I didn't, you did. So the current application question for methods and design reads, describe in detail the monitoring methods that will be followed and provide the citation for the protocols that will be used. So the guidance for the response, sufficient detail of the methods and protocols should be provided to demonstrate to reviewers there is a firm understanding how the data will be collected for quality assurance and control. For established methods and protocols, include references and locations of where they are available on the internet. Do not simply upload the protocol or report to the application and reference the attached document. Wherever possible, explain how consideration of greenhouse gas emissions reductions informed the selection of your methods. For example, this method requires fewer vehicle trips per month. So the example response.
Okay. The project will deploy real-time temperature monitors, which allow for the remote collection of data, which greatly reduces travel time, costs, and greenhouse gas emissions associated with frequent visits to the project sites. Pretty short and to the point on this one. Questions, concerns, thoughts?
I guess
Yeah,
we're
go ahead, Derek.
assuming that the actual monitoring of whether we're doing water temps or O2 or whatever, other water quality issues, we're assuming those all contribute to our adaptation and resilience plan for a particular watershed.
Yes, and again, this is an example of just one of the evaluation criteria and how it would play out in this particular question.
Yeah, so this is only the example response is just about the collection. So when we're applying for a monitoring grant, we'll go through the standard, here's why we're doing it, kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks, guy. Go ahead, Dirk.
Yeah, I guess my first thought reading this response is that they only answered like half of it. Like, I don't understand, like everybody I know is doing real-time temperature monitors. So what is the alternative? What are they not doing? What, compared to this proposal? So to me, this is like, yeah, this works because but everybody I know is putting in remote temperature monitors and going out and collecting data occasionally. So I'd be curious to know how this is, they're doing something different. But
it's good. Yeah, things have definitely changed since days when I was going out to the streams a few times this summer to try to grab the temperature loggers and upload the data. So I think it's great that most people are now doing the real-time temperature monitoring and just pull it up at your desktop.
But we're also
your office.
Most sites don't have real time. It's long-term loggers that you check, occasionally when you get out there. So yeah, I didn't realize that's what you meant by this answer. But anyways, it would be nice to understand how that's, in a response. If I was going to be ranking it, I'd want to know a little bit more information about how what they're doing is actually different than what they were doing.
Yeah, that's fair.
In one quick example, we're monitoring more I mean, we have the temp loggers, but we're also monitoring for other things. And through a grant that we got from DEQ or something, we're able to set up our own little lab in our office area so we can do some testing of our water samples. So we're still collecting water samples. So we're now no longer driving an hour, 45 minutes to get our samples tested. So we're doing it ourselves. I guess that's an example of something. Reduce emissions.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, Anne, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think these are good points. And I think one thing that would be potentially important too in the guidance, since there is the wherever possible or whenever possible language, it is probably likely that on some projects, maybe there is not really a way to do this effectively. And so just reiterating to the applicants that they need to explain why that is, and that the benefit is greater to do it a certain way, even if it doesn't allow them to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in this particular instance. There may be a valid reason for that. And as long as that can be articulated and weighed against those other factors, that seems like an important thing.
Yeah, agreed, Anne. Thanks for saying that. I was actually, as we were developing the examples, I was kind of thinking of that too. Like maybe we could do an example along those same lines of this. We tried to incorporate this, but it just we couldn't make it work. But yeah, I thought that was maybe a little bit too much in the weeds for this particular exercise. But I was thinking the same thing. Okay.
Yeah, I
Right.
think
Move on.
some monitoring is going to be easy and remote and not equipment heavy, and some is reliant on a lot of trips in the field and labs and calibration and collecting samples and using boats and all kinds of things. So it's just kind of the scale of what the monitoring project is.
Right.
Yep.
Oh, Eric, there's a comment in the chat. I can't see it. Is it something that I missed from before?
Oh, that was from me. Basically talking about I found a link on the internet about the biodiesel emissions from my comment from a while back.
Oh, thanks, Dirk. Okay, so we'll move on to our last example for land acquisition, trying to get at this first criteria, engagement with local communities disproportionately impacted by climate change. So the current application question gets at community benefits and impacts. So describe community engagement completed to date for the project, including outreach to the county commission or city government, as well as potential interested parties such as neighbors, industry groups, and local communities disproportionately impacted by climate change. And as part of your response, describe engagement with these local communities disproportionately impacted by climate change to get input on potential benefits to these communities. So something I just was thinking about, Kristen, based on what you brought up, you know, what we try to do wherever possible was try to integrate the criteria into existing questions. But, you know, as part of like the community engagement one, is that something we need to think about pulling out separately because we have that meaningful engagement terminology, you know, so just think about that as you're like looking at this and we're looking through the response. Maybe it's something that it needs to be asked as a separate question. And then here's the example response.
The project proponents have presented the project at city council and county council meetings, as well as to local service clubs, which provide important opportunities to engage the community in the benefits of the proposed project, as well as to listen and address concerns raised when possible. As part of the discussions, the project proponents noted concern with water quality and how long-term protection of the Price Creek headwaters could help protect and improve water quality as the region continues to experience increases in extreme precipitation events drought and warmer summers.
Well, I don't see any direct reference to any disproportionately impacted communities. So maybe we should think about adding that into the response.
Yeah, I think that's it. And this, I think this was a part of we pulled this out of the larger examples. And I think maybe somewhere in there it talked about Price Creek being, I forgot if it was a rural or urban watershed. I think it was somewhere it was mentioned, that I think it's a good point that we should make it clear in all of our examples. Yeah, Bruce.
The suggestion I would have there is to have something about consultation with tribes. You know, the tribes have a role most everywhere anything is working, and that is one clear example of one of those communities. And, you know, simply making a presentation in a city council or a county commission is not really necessarily engaging with people, and particularly with like the tribes. You need to go out and ask them for their opinions on things up front. Here's the plan. What do you think?
Good. Yeah, thanks, Bruce. Go ahead, Kristen.
I think Bruce just sort of got to it at the end of his comment there. It's an overarching question for me, and we've talked about it throughout these meetings, of what is meaningful engagement. And in my mind, and it may not always be possible with every single application, like the culvert project example, you're replacing a culvert up on one private industrial timber company's lot, and you talk to that landowner, they're game, you have access, let's do it. But meaningful engagement means coming with, in my mind anyway, not coming with a predetermined project and, you know, engaging and saying, here's what we want to do and we want to get your support on it. It's a lot bigger than that. And so I feel like it's either you're genuinely asking for folks to meaningfully engage, or, you know, you're not, essentially, because I feel like a lot of the examples are just like, we have a project and we want you to support it. And so, or be involved. So it's a large and complicated question. And I know OWEB, in parallel to this, is working on its own diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts and reaching underserved communities. And what does that mean as a state agency? And what does that mean for us as grantees and applicants? And that's a huge, huge thing in conversation. And so just sort of incorporating it in here without really understanding what it means and what you can actually fund with these lottery dollars in that regard, I think is very complex. And so I challenge us to think about that a little more.
Yeah, I would just add on to what Kristen was saying and say maybe we need to ask them to list who are the disproportionately impacted communities, local communities, if they even know, you know, who they think that they are, because I think that could be a tough question for somebody. So maybe like start simple and just have them identify who they believe that is, and then they can outreach to them.
You know, part of it, and again, I don't, it's not my job, right, as a board member to do these grants, but I would, if I were submitting something in about, you know, how we have in this particular grant application engaged disproportionately, you know, communities that are disproportionately affected by climate change. And I can't remember on the capacity grant application about how we have to describe our board or whatever. But again, thinking of our local example, we made a concerted effort to have those communities represented on our board. So every project we do gets reviewed by our board, which includes dairymen, industrial timber, small woodlot, sport fishermen, commercial fishermen. I mean, those people all sit on our board. And so in addition to the various presentations and stuff we made, county commissioners and all that kind of stuff, but you know, I mean, that's kind of the response I would have from our council, is that all of our projects are reviewed and monitored by the communities that are really impacted by climate change in our area.
Yeah, thanks, Guy. Go ahead, Dirk.
Yeah, I think that brings up a good point. To me, it makes me wonder about the scale. So if I'm thinking about a community disproportionately affected, probably if I'm looking at a project, I'm thinking about like what's going on in Wheeler County, which community there is going to be impacted by climate change. And Guy's bringing up the point, well, you know, it's the tribe or the ocean fishermen is the community that's being affected. So I guess I don't know if we need more. I'm looking at the guidance. We've got definitions listed. I'm wondering if we should maybe have a definition for community that disproportionately impacted. Like, how are we? Because if we're going to have everybody looking at this, we're all going to be coming. All the different reviewers are going to be coming at it with a completely different opinion of what that means.
Yeah, and we'll get to the definition too here in a little bit, as we do have some draft language there on the communities disproportionately impacted by climate change. Alex.
Yeah, I just wanted to, I think I've touched on this before, and maybe I'm just being a little bit annoying here. But kind of bring into this discussion as well the geographic context a little, and how we define that. In terms of communities disproportionately impacted, we have, this is a very rural area, but the one sort of land acquisition project we've had out here in recent memory was met locally by, with a ton of opposition. But then the flip side of that is that, it's not really a community in our operating area. And this was not our organization, it was another one, but there are communities disproportionately affected by climate change that are downstream a ways or far downstream a ways that this project, this land acquisition still could have potentially benefited, in the form of, this was an acquisition of headwaters habitat that supports Chinook salmon and steelhead. And although the sort of local community, or I should say a subset of the local community was extremely opposed to this acquisition, there's cultural and material benefits to tribal entities downstream, as well as fishermen at the mouth of the Columbia. And so I just kind of want to throw that out there to I guess provide a little bit more context, or seek a little more context in terms of how this is applied geographically. I don't know, just a thought.
Good thought. And maybe in the definition, when we get to that point, we can kind of talk about that.
Great. Yeah, go ahead, Heather.
Yeah, Jesse, can you flip to the next slide real quick again? Yeah, I think as a specific example, I think we should add something about a disproportionate community here, and whether it's we worked with the tribes, or we're going to be putting information out in multiple languages, or have a neighborhood meeting with just something a little more here. And then I think I would like it better to address that disproportionate communities portion.
Yep, that's totally fair. Thanks, Heather. Yeah, Bruce.
Yeah, Alex's comment reminded me that maybe want to reconsider the reference to local communities in the rule. Because if the point is addressing communities that are disproportionately affected by climate change, it's not just necessarily those that local people consider local.
Good. Okay. Heather, did your hand just go back up or? Okay.
Okay. Okay, so now reflecting back on the rulemaking considerations, we've gone through these draft climate criteria, looked at what they might look like in practice, you know, as we integrate them into the application, questions, or guidance. So as you look back through these rulemaking considerations, you know, what might we be missing, or what have we not adequately addressed or considered? You know, what is there anything in here that just it flags for you, like, oh, we, you know, in our criteria, it's just this, or you know, just I think, Chris, you brought up earlier, just again, going back, we really need to be clear about our definitions and our expectations. So that's really an important one to keep coming back to. But as you look back through these, are there any that just like really strike you? Okay, well, take some time to think about it. If anything comes to your mind after the RAC meeting, or as we go into the review of the criteria and the definitions, you know, be sure to bring it up or send us comments on it. And then we've kind of talked about this already a little bit today, but just a final thought, and if we have future RAC meetings, this is something I'd like us to talk a little bit more about again, but just what, as you go through these kinds of guidance and the questions and the responses that we put here, what kinds of resources or technical assistance would you need to be able to effectively respond to these types of questions or guidance? And like I said, some of this has come up already today. It's been really helpful just to get a sense of like, this is what would be helpful for standardization across the different regions. Just something to think about and help OWEB get you what you need and get our applicants what they need.
I think it'll be great to get feedback. You know, when we submit grants and whatnot, you know, you get your individual feedback, but it'd be great to kind of put it out more broadly for these questions, just to see, as a check-in, see where we're at. You know, somehow, I think that would be really helpful as people work through. Are they, you know, doing the right thing? And then since the guidance document isn't in statute, is there, I guess it could be modified down the line if it's like, oh man, nobody's answering this question the way we intended. We need to rework this or something, right?
Yes.
So yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. Or we really need to clarify the guidance to like make sure they know like what we're looking for and the kind of answer. Yep.
Yeah.
And the guidance document may need to be reworked a little bit after the OWEB takes a look at the application process now. So there might be things that we can build into the new application, streamlined application process.
Yeah, I mean, this is very much the first draft when it comes to the guidance, and it will change based on revised applications. It'll change based on, I think, the feedback that we've heard today from you all. I think some really robust discussion on this, and I know I appreciate that quite a bit. So yeah, I have on my list for a future RAC meeting, which I think I would like to have at least one more. Definitely come back with some updated guidance and beefed up examples. So. Okay. I think we're ready for a break. So why don't we take 17 minutes and come back at 10 to revisit the draft rules and definitions.
10 minutes, or did you say?
At 10 o'clock. So 17
Oh,
minutes.
at 10 o'clock. Okay.
Yep.
They don't go outside? Gotta get my cup.
Eric, am I doing sharing my screen to do real-time edits of the criteria right now?
Sorry, Jesse,
Eric,
did you?
did you hear? Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you need me to?
Sorry.
Do you want me to
Yeah.
share my screen
Okay.
for the criteria? Okay.
Yeah. Thanks.
We'll get there. Still early.
Okay. So welcome back, folks. I'm going to keep a little bit of a tight timeline here as we want to try to get this in as good a place as possible today. So thank you, Jesse. Sharing your screen. Next up, after the really robust discussion on the guidance, let's move back into the draft rules and really think about what we discussed during the guidance piece, as well as any of the edits. And I know some folks do have edits that would help make this clear and better received for grant applicants, grantees, reviewers, etc. So maybe if we start up at the top in the bit of the preamble, we added the wherever possible piece up there. I will say right now we did hear back from one of the RAC members who was unable to attend today, who proposed an edit there. So following wherever possible on is to add how the applicant. And then because it mentions how the applicant in 1, but it's really about how the applicant in both 2 and 3 as well. So a bit of a wordsmithing piece, but it would perhaps make the rules read a little bit cleaner. So that's one, potential edit. So we would add how the applicant there, remove, then how the applicant in 1, and then do a little bit of wordsmithing to begin 2 to read incorporates changing climate conditions. And then remove, yeah, there you go. And then in 3, how the applicant considers. Yep.
I forgot.
Thoughts on
What's
that?
the last bit? It's this part changes to inform, like considers the other one.
Yeah, so it goes carbon, so storage, let's see, long-term carbon sequestration or storage. Well, let's get to that because I think there's another part of the proposed edit. So let's leave it for now, but I want to just check with folks to see how changing it to how the applicant reads, and then if you have other suggestions starting in that preamble piece.
I think it just makes the others more awkward myself.
Sorry, Bruce, you said it, you thought it makes it more awkward?
I think it makes phrasing number 2 and number 3 more awkward. I'm just not sure what problem it fixes.
Okay. Okay.
Kristen, you're muted. All right, I muted my phone during the break as extra double backup. Maybe an alternative is in the preamble, leaving it the way it was. Grant applications shall also be evaluated wherever possible so you're evaluating the grant application, not how the applicant. Grant applications shall be evaluated on, and so number 1 would be grant applications meaningfully engage, or something like that. So you just take how the applicant out altogether. I don't know if it works, but just to Bruce's point, it's, yeah. How the, incorporates meaningful engagement or something that's consistent with number 2, rather than changing number 2 and number 3 to match number 1. You change number 1 to match the tone of number 2 and number 3, something like that.
Okay. That's fair. Yeah, go ahead, Bruce.
Yeah, I did. As long as we're on that one there, meaningfully, to me, that's the answer, not the question. The question is, or the criteria is, how do they engage local communities? And if the answer is meaningfully, you get a thumbs up.
Okay, that was, I think, a fairly significant part of the conversation we had during the guidance. One of the other members who's not here suggested removing meaningfully. Yeah. Thank you, Jesse. Otherwise, it should be defined. So let's test this. How would it look to remove it for folks? And then have, like Bruce said, if it's meaningful, the reviewers are going to give you a thumbs up. If it's not meaningful, something less than a thumbs up.
Yeah, I like that. I approve of this message.
Okay. Yeah, Kristen.
I think so that we had a lot of discussion about this in our first RAC meeting. So I think it'd be important to reflect back, which is when meaningful got added. So I don't want to undo what we already did without remembering why we did what we did. But to my points today, I agree with sort of Bruce's point in that right now, the way it's worded, meaningfully engages, feels a little bit like lip service, unless the guidance or the examples, in some cases, are a little different. To me, meaningful means two-way, informing the scope and the shape of the project. What are the objectives? What does it look like? Not like going and saying, we have this project, look at it. So it seems like sort of picking one or the other. But I do want to just honor that in our first meeting is when we added meaningfully, and sort of remembering why and what that input was, which I can't off the top of my head. So.
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. Okay, so I think I'm hearing let's strike it for now, but go back and see if we can look at some of the notes and the discussion around the first track meeting to see if we're losing something that we thought was important in the first track meeting. Yeah, Dirk.
Just to add to that, I think if we're going to keep it in there, we should define it, like what actually does meaningful mean for our applicants to understand what we're looking for. Personally, I like getting rid of it. I like trimming words out of things if wherever possible, keep things as concise as possible.
Okay. Yeah, I concur, Dirk, on all points there. Okay, so anything else in one that y'all want to discuss?
I guess
I'm sorry, go ahead.
sorry. I was going to talk and then I noticed Dirk's hand was up, so I don't know if it's still up or just he had something else to say.
Go ahead. I think I just put my hand up instead of speaking up. So go ahead, Kristen, and I'll speak after you.
Okay. I can send this after the rack. I would love to see in the guidance, you know, I could provide some of the examples of what I'm thinking of in terms of some of this engagement. You know, again, some cases it would be relevant, in some cases it wouldn't, but in some of this sort of two-way communication and front end input sort of thing. So I'd love to see the guidance beefed up on that where it fits and examples provided for this number one.
Yep, noted, Kristen. And yeah, if you have some proposed language, I think we would love to see it and incorporate that into the revised guidance. Okay, we'll go Dirk and then Alex.
I guess I'm looking at the definition on the local communities disproportionately impacted. And I'm wondering if we should get rid of the term local, because it seems like we are focused, you know, on a scale that's larger than local. If we're looking at Native American tribes, communities of color, rural communities, like this is a very broad, like that definition is broader than what I would consider as local. Local to me is, you know, the probably a reasonable commute from your project site, not hours and hours away. So I don't know if that's something we should try and define a little bit better.
Yeah, thanks, Dirk. That gets, I think, at Alex's points a little bit earlier. And we've talked about this in the past, I think, struggle between, you know, including local and not. So where do folks land right now after seeing the guidance and reflecting on it a little bit? Alex,
Yeah,
I think
Dirk basically said what I was going to say, and mostly I was kind of chiming in because this I think the definition we've included does, you know, we got a good definition there of what communities disproportionately impacted means, but not necessarily what local means for one. And two, I almost think it's at the discretion or the prerogative of the individual organization rather than this program, where, you know, like for my own operations or my own, you know, long-term strategizing or relationship building, it matters for me. But I guess for OWEB's purposes, you know, if I have a project that has a huge benefit to a downstream tribe that is 3 counties away, but is adamantly opposed by the neighboring landowner, what's the weighting there? And so I guess I do kind of agree with Dirk. Maybe we do strike local, and that's for us to consider as you know, conservation organizations that have to develop long-term relationships in these communities.
Thanks, Alex. Yeah, Guy, who's your hand up?
I apologize, I can't seem to get my video turned on. I don't know. But anyways, it's just, does it make a difference that number one is is general in nature, and number 2 and 3 are project specific.
Yeah, so I think this was also a point made by one of the members that isn't here, that, you know, is this talking project specific, as you said, Guy, or is it
Yeah.
kind of broadly speaking what the entity is, the grant applicant is doing? Is that?
Yeah. So we mentioned
yeah.
in 2 and 3, we talk about, you know, inform the project, you know, how the project will do whatever. But in number 1, it's just a general how we engage communities disproportionately impacted. So it's the response. I mean, in number 1, I mean, getting back to an earlier example, I can't remember who gave it, Alex or somebody, that where you've got a land acquisition that may impact people way downstream, but that's a project specific reference to a land acquisition project. This is very broad and doesn't refer to any particular project or whatever, just how we engage in general, I guess.
If we add in the project after climate change, and maybe this could be probably wordsmith, but something like that.
Yeah, or again, grammatically, would it be better to disproportionately impacted by the project?
Well,
I don't know, whatever
yeah.
it is, but all I'm saying, however you word it, wherever you put the phrase, I just, unless it's the intention is to keep it broad and not refer as you do to specific projects in 2 and 3. But I don't think that was the intention. So I would add something like in the project. Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, the intent is that I think is definitely for it to be project specific and not just in general what an organization or the applicant is doing. So we can chew on where to place that project specific language.
Whoever's good with it.
So I saw hands. I'm going to guess on the order of Kristen, Bruce, and Dirk.
On Guy's question, I mean, I don't know if it helps, but the preamble says grant applications, you know, so the specific applications shall be evaluated on 1, 2, and 3. So I don't know if that sort of covers the specificity question or not. And then, and sorry to be this person, but we added local, I think, in like the second RAC meeting. So again, we put it in there, and it's fine to continue to change. And as we're looking, especially at the guidance, is how this, you know, where the rubber meets the road, essentially, and how this plays out. But I just want to sort of, you know, be aware of our past conversations. And I mentioned this the last time we talked about it, is in the stakeholder engagement current bubble diagram and the stakeholder bubble. It is the little blurb says engage with appropriate stakeholders in the appropriate geography. So to Alex's point, it's of the local entity sort of defining what that scope and scale is, and the review team sort of assessing, did the local entity define it appropriately? So I don't know if the same applies here or not in terms of these communities we're talking about.
Great, and thank you, Kristen. Okay, Bruce and Dirk.
Yeah, I think I agree with where Guy was coming from, if I understood him correctly. And the way that this is framed, it's really, what did you do? Did you engage? How did you engage with these people? Not what was the outcome of that? What was the effect? And, you know, I think the other questions really get at what, you know, what's it mean? What's the effect of this here? So my preference would be to say how engagement with communities disproportionately affected by climate change has informed the project. So not just, did you go through the check the box process of saying we met with or talked with somebody, but did it actually inform the project?
Good. I'm seeing some nodding heads on that, on Bruce's edit there. Great.
I like that, except what if you're proposing a project that you're going to engage the communities you haven't already, but it will inform the project. Like that's the point of the project, like with the stakeholder engagement, for example, you're going to be reaching out to these communities to influence something, gather information, make some decisions. So I just don't want to limit it to already having informed the project necessarily, if the goal is to reach out to those communities as a part of the project.
Good. Yeah, so has informed or will inform the project, something along those lines. Okay, good.
So I've got a couple of 2 points. I think, you know what, when we talked about the local communities, I kind of like keeping that in there because I think that's probably what we should be focused on when we're reviewing applications. And for me, when I read the definition, it's really broad and it almost sounds more like diversity, equity, inclusion component, which I think would be fine if that's something we want to add. But I think with our goal here is to focus in on the climate impacts, and I think the climate impacts that can be addressed by individual projects are at that local scale, and so engaging more specifically with those local communities I think is important, and understanding how those communities are disproportionately impacted by climate change I think is important. You know, I think about examples of like, you know, flooding of roadways, or, you know, access across bridges for EMS services that might be impaired due to the effects of climate change. I think our definition down below is just far too broad.
Okay, thanks, Dirk. Yeah, so Anne, do you have a response there?
Yeah, just on this point, it is a very broad definition, and I'm almost wondering if there should be some additional information in the definition, because it seems like a two-part definition. There's communities that need to be considered, and then we can discuss what the extent of local means. And then there's also disproportionately impacted by climate change. So that doesn't seem to be addressed in that question. And I think, just as an example, I mean, everybody in the state is already being impacted by climate change, but some places more so than others. So I think maybe adding a little bit more specificity on what disproportionately impacted means.
Okay. And we've pulled that definition from existing state statute. It's not 100% aligned with, you know, what we're doing here, but it was, I thought, pretty close. But we can go back and chew on it a little bit more.
I would
Yeah,
just
I'm just thinking
ask
about that.
that if folks have suggestions or you have, please send them to us, because we looked at a lot of different definitions from different, like, for example, different environmental justice reports or other like state statutes or documents. And so if there's specific ones that you can send us that you think get at some of your points, that would be really helpful, because I think what we tried to pull together, we're starting to see like themes across the different resources that we looked at. But if you see something that's more specific, please send it our way.
Yeah, thanks, Jesse. Heather.
Yeah, I just kind of just looking at the original number one and the rewrite. I think the focus on number one is engagement, and then the focus on number two seems to be the informing of the project. And so I think, I don't know, I kind of like the way it was written, with the engagement part being the focus. And then people can describe what that is. I think the informing, I think it's going to be, it might be challenging in some places to get there, to explain that, you know what I mean? And I think with the way it was written, people can talk about that, but it's kind of more broad. So I don't know. I kind of like the original writing of it a little bit better, I guess.
Okay. Kristen.
Heather, can you, so I think I liked Bruce's edit. I liked the revision in terms of engagement being two-way, and actually the engagement with the community resulting in input and helping to shape the outcome of the project in some way. So I guess my question to you, in terms of the original language, what do you think of when you think of as engagement? So focusing on the actual engagement rather than the impact of the engagement on the ultimate application, you know, how it developed.
Yeah, I think so, like we're doing a stakeholder engagement project right now, and part of our focus is putting out materials and doing workshops in Spanish to reach Spanish speaking communities in our area, with, you know, so the goal is to change knowledge and behaviors, but that is the project. So I guess it just kind of, it doesn't necessarily make sense in maybe that specific stakeholder engagement project. And then, you know, maybe same too with if you're doing a restoration project, like you might have engagement in there with those same communities, but you know, your project is already, you're proposing it because you've already gone down the line of, you've got the design and you're ready to go. You'd like to propose this alternative. And so, you know, just to have that come back and inform the project, you know, where are you at with your project in that regard? So it's just a little bit, maybe it's like how you did engage with those communities to inform the project, is maybe that's what I'm getting at. It's like not how you're going to, but how you did. And that would put it on like where you're at when you're actually applying for the grant. I don't know, maybe that's where I'm hung up, is sort of like the timing on it. Like, we're not proposing a project and then saying we're going to get input from these disproportionately affected communities and then redesign the project necessarily, but how did we get there? Who did we engage? Maybe that's why I'm kind of getting hung up on it. And
That's helpful. No, yeah. Oh,
yeah, and so it does say has informed the project. So, but sometimes you're proposing to do that with your project. So I guess that's why I kind of like it a little more broad. And maybe, you know, maybe it's one of those things that down the line with responses, it gets tweaked, you know, the guidance gets tweaked a little bit. But I like the way it was written. I could write a lot in there, you know. But when I talk about how it informed the project, I might be reaching and saying, well, yeah, we did all this outreach to these communities, but and we got feedback. But I don't know. I'm just kind of a fan of the simpler and let people kind of talk it out with what they feel is engagement there.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that, Heather. Dallas.
Yeah, I think I guess as an applicant, with the range of different projects that are happening, they're all going to be in different stages of engagement, I predict. And so I think that it is to a certain degree going to be up to the applicant to explain where they're at within that. And we have to allow them to have that discretion and then allow the reviewers to interpret that. And so I don't want to get too far into trying to adapt to something that, you know, people are going to be in different levels in. I think either one of those versions will actually get to basically a similar answer for most applicants.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks, Dallas. Guy.
So this may be not something that we can actually do given other guidance, but when I think of communities disproportionately impacted by climate change, I don't think that there's any particular ethnic or race or income level or whatever that gets away from the impacts of climate change. And so I was thinking of, you know, let's just take the community I live in, very small community. There's some probably there's a lot of people here who don't fit a lot of the description of what we would think of as not empowered communities and not whatever. But when the water stops running because of climate change and we haven't done proper natural storage, everybody's going to be without drinking water, and everybody, no matter what their income status, whatever, is going to be disproportionately affected by climate change. And this, you know, because of what climate change does to the ecosystem services that they need. So it just struck me that climate change doesn't pick and choose. I mean, based on a lot of other factors that we tend to do, climate change is going to affect everybody.
Yeah.
So if we do a project, again, taking our little local community to increase natural storage in the uplands, to protect people's drinking water, is that less valuable because of the people who live here? Am I, you know, and again, I know that there's political requirements here to make this, to do this in certain ways, but climate change is not going to pick and choose.
Yeah. Thanks, Guy. And just to respond really quick to that. So we do have coastal communities as one of those that are disproportionately impacted.
I guess what
I think,
go ahead.
To your point. Oh, go ahead.
Well,
I was going to say to your point that this is, yeah, go ahead, Guy.
That list could be endless. In other words, we're looking at it in a way of you know, we're trying to pick out all the groups of people, but actually it's the people who are disproportionately affected by climate change in a particular project have to do with the ecosystem service that they're depending on. it's we're looking at it in some ways in reverse. That should we be looking at a community that's disproportionately impacted by climate change as a community that's dependent on water that may dry up, or drought or whatever, and that the drought or water, the temperature or whatever it is going to affect everybody. And maybe it's like, well, who can, who has the ability to move, or I don't know, do something different. But it just seems that it's a bit in reverse, because that list that we have could go forever. It depends on what the change is and what it's doing and what people are dependent on that's changing. All right, I probably should argue this in another place.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I appreciate it, Guy. Kristen and then Dallas.
I think to Guy's question, the way I interpret this, his point was speaking about communities impacted by climate change, which is everybody. I think the key is how one interprets disproportionately. And the way I've interpreted that, and I don't recall if we spoke about this in one of our prior meetings, is when you think about who's contributing to climate change, and this is super loaded. This is really complicated. So when I think about disproportionately impacted, the disproportionate is who's contributing versus who's feeling the impacts. And so lower income folks, tribes, communities of color are contributing less to climate change happening and being exacerbated, but are yet impacted by it more, hence the disproportionate, and also often have less of a voice in the decision-making table. So those are the two pieces I think that are wrapped into that word disproportionate. That is what this was trying to get at when you look at the climate resolution and the diversity, equity, and inclusion language that OEB is trying to work on and incorporate. So it's huge. It's a huge statement. And it's tough.
Well, I appreciate that, Kristen. And so then I would take out coastal communities and some other things. I mean, that's a good way of looking at it. Kind of who are people who are mostly who are doing things that are causing climate change versus who are people who are causing less, yet are going to be impacted in the same way, but disproportionately because they're not causing the change. So coastal communities, probably in that definition way, the way you just described it, things like coastal communities should be taken out.
Can I add something just before we try to take stuff out though too? Is I think that like another way to think about it is some communities, if you think of like the fires that happened in Medford, and a lot of the folks that were impacted there don't have house insurance. And so or like in close coastal communities, if there's flooding happening, the people that are disproportionately impacted are the lower income families that don't have insurance to cover the loss of house and property. And so I totally understand what you're saying, Guy. And I think about, like my local community and how I would frame this on who we're impacting. But I think it is important for us to think about, and I think we all acknowledge that everybody's affected by climate change. That's probably why we're here, but there are still people that feel it more. And it's really all encompassing, and we really need to think about it intelligently and think about it, like from OEB's perspective and what their mission and values and everything there is as well.
No, I get it. I understand the thing. And, I think of, again, maybe my perspective is local in the sense of that flooding disproportionately affects those fairly wealthy people who can live along the ocean and along the streams, and our lower income folks live inland and are not affected as much by flooding. So I guess it's, if you can afford to put yourself in harm's way. But I don't, again, this is like, I guess I understand the intent, and an intent of inclusion, which I think is more important in my mind, that it's making sure we include everyone who is affected by climate change. And again, my earlier thought about being a project specific, who is maybe disproportionately impacted by this particular project that is designed to respond to the impacts of climate change, or what climate change is doing. Anyway, so or another time.
Yeah, thanks, guys. And before we get to you, Dirk, I mean, I think, we didn't come up with this definition on our own. And I'd be really hesitant for OWEB to go out on a limb to
right.
try to identify who is disproportionately impacted by climate change. I don't think that's OWEB, state grant making agencies' role here. So I want to be really careful that what we put here, I think, should be backed up in existing state policy. So that's kind of where we're coming from. Go ahead, Dirk.
Yeah, maybe this feeds into that. I'm trying to think about it. If I'm an applicant and I'm proposing a project, what is reasonable for an engagement aspect for me to undertake for this standard? Obviously, if I'm working in the Deschutes, I'm not going to be engaging with, coastal communities. At least as a reviewer, I wouldn't expect somebody from the Deschutes or Lake County or something to need to coordinate with those communities. So what is the community at that local scale? I know we've kind of bounced around it. We've added in the project, and so maybe that covers it. But I do feel like we really need to bring this down to something more manageable for the applicant to address. And I think I'm trying to figure out how we can address this question in a manner that's not what I see right here is I'm like, well, that's a huge group of disproportionately impacted communities. If I'm an applicant, how do I condense that and make it actually usable?
Okay, Dallas, did your hand just go up?
Yeah, I was just going to add, I mean, maybe back again to kind of what I said earlier is maybe part of this is how the applicant identifies and engages with local communities. Just get that first step of figuring who that is for you, I think is key.
Identifies, okay. Okay, does that seem like a good place to jump off from with one? I'm cognizant of time, and it's okay. We don't need to get into the fiscal impacts discussion quite yet. Are we good to kind of work on that language and jump into the subsection 2 there? Okay, seeing some nodding heads. Okay. Let's see how far we get in 2. Thoughts on, and thanks, Dallas. Appreciate that. Thoughts on this language as it stands right now? Bruce and then Guy.
Oops. Okay.
Yeah, I had one change I wanted to recommend. It's not something I feel real strongly about, but the reference in number 2 to durable adaptation. I don't know that adaptation is durable. And I went back to look up more in the scientific literature around how we talk about resilience. And one of the terms that comes up is adaptive capacity. So I was going to suggest that we say durable resilience and adaptive capacity for ecosystems. It's minor, but a little bit more precise in my mind in getting at what it is that we are trying to make durable there.
Okay, reactions to adaptive capacity.
Are you suggesting just take out durable?
No,
Oh, okay.
So would that just, you come up with some definition instead of adaptation, adaptive capacity, the ability to adjust to, or however you'd update the definition to link with that?
and I found that on Wikipedia, I think, so it's not hard to find a definition.
Okay. Not seeing anything strong one way or the other on this, so I'd say we can chew on it.
Yeah, I kind of like the adaptive capacity.
Okay.
Because it allows you to talk about how what you're doing will maybe add, but yeah, then you don't have to say it's going to last for some amount of time or the next flood event or whatever, but you're going to be doing something that's going to protect against these high flood events or whatever. So you're providing some capacity for the adaptation. So I guess I kind of like that new language there.
Okay. Thanks, Heather. Go ahead, Guy.
Well, I'm going to go back to my first statement about and human communities. I guess I just go to a kind of in my mind, the strict definition of ecosystems doesn't include human communities, and that's why I had it put in my notes, just taking the word including out and just putting and in.
What do folks think about that?
And I know I'm thinking of kind of a more strict biological interpretation of what ecosystems are, but and I guess it comes also
Go ahead, Bruce.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I can see it both ways there. If you were saying natural ecosystems, then I would say and human communities. I think the reality is human communities have been part of and been shaping ecosystems since, many thousands of years. So
Sure.
I think it could be right either way, but I would distinguish if you're going to say, and if you're going to separate them out, I'd say natural ecosystems. But what's a natural ecosystem? I don't know.
Well, in biology, it's any of those natural systems, but you use the term ecosystem services, and the definition of that is services that are provided by nature to human communities.
Okay. Kristen.
I think this is a philosophical debate that we should all go, hang out some afternoon and talk about it. I mean, I feel like restoration practitioners have been debating if humans are a part of or external to the ecosystem. And I imagine whoever you ask, you could get many different answers to this question.
Is it too early for a glass of wine, Kristen? We can.
I don't know. It's Friday. I personally like including, and I tend toward Bruce's comment that humans have been a part of and managing these systems for millennia, and this language is lending very human, and we are a part of these systems. And if we don't start thinking about ourselves as part of these systems, we'll continue to do worse than better, personally. So that's where I land.
Thanks, Kristen. Alex.
Yeah, I think, I mean, kind of on the same token, I'm including as well as and encompasses, I think, what we're trying to get at. I favor including human communities just because I don't like to draw hard lines on that. But the thing I was going to get at is like, I think it's really a what are we trying to accomplish here? And so when we throw the human communities word in there, are we talking about the resilience, the adaptive capacity of infrastructure? And so do we want to kind of, as opposed to us just making adjustments in order to protect ecosystems, which include, human elements, I guess. So I think there's a risk of with the human communities discussion, pushing into areas that this isn't necessarily intended for. To be clear, I do like that inclusion. I just think some level of clarification, perhaps in the definitions, or defining how human communities is included there, might bear or might behoove us.
Well, that's a really good point and I know that human communities has been in and out previous discussions, but does that open up things that OWEB grants really shouldn't be addressing? Adaptation and resilience in human communities. I mean, what is it that we do that would, I'm trying to think of something a project that we would do, an adaptation or resilience project.
Yeah, let me just chime in real quick. So remember, this is one criterion in a host and a sea of other evaluation criteria, which we in the I think at the last meeting talked about including the human communities because it's important, and it's important for our board. It's I think important for OWEB projects, but one that's just going to benefit human communities, but not offer any real ecosystem or watershed benefits. That's not going to rise to the top as a grant application through OWEB's review. So it might hit high on this particular one, but it's going to wash out with everything else. So I wouldn't get too hung up on including the human communities from the perspective of, OWEB's not going to fund projects that were once not funded or even ineligible. Anne, see your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going back to the original question you asked, Eric, and regarding where we stood on it. I have no problem with the language of including human communities. I think Kristen's answer was nice to that, and so that's not a problem for me.
Cool. Okay, I'm sensing a critical mass of RAC members saying including human communities. Guy, are you okay with that?
Sure. I mean, I understand the intent. It's not critical. That's fine.
Okay. Good discussion. Okay. Anything else in 2 in the remaining 6 minutes that we have? Okay. Not seeing anything. I'm a little hesitant to get into 3 right now in the 5 minutes that we now have, because I don't want to shortchange or provide short shrift to a discussion that we might have on it. And I imagine folks have some thoughts on it. So what I'm going to suggest now is that we just pause the discussion now. I think I mentioned this earlier. This is our last scheduled RAC meeting, but I think we're definitely in a place where it would benefit from having at least one, potentially two more RAC meetings on the schedule. Would that be amenable for you all to look for something in March or in early April timeframe? Okay.
Absolutely.
Thumbs up.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. It's great discussion today. I appreciate it just so much across the board. So I think what we will do is work on some of that, the updated guidance, beefing up the examples as we discussed. We can make some of the changes as we noted this morning on the evaluation to draft evaluation criteria. And then when we get, and also with, potentially the definitions. And then when we come back for the next meeting, I think we'll probably try to spend the majority of the time on the evaluation criteria, but also definitely set aside some for the guidance and examples, but have the bulk on the draft rules.
Eric, what's our timeline with the board? I mean, in terms of, does the board expect something in April?
Yeah. Board expects, we'll have an update to the board, OWEB board in April, just letting them know what a great rack we have and kind of where we're at in the process. And the real meat and potatoes is going to happen, at least in our timeline, in July. So working backwards from that, we'd probably want to have a set of draft, kind of that finalist draft criteria out for public comment, and probably in the May timeframe. And that would give, ample time for public comment. In June, we would have OWEB staff would be reviewing comments and responding to it, incorporating potentially that into the draft rules, and then getting it before the board in July. So I think we definitely have time for a couple more RAC meetings, and appreciate you all being amenable to meeting again. Jesse, anything else for the good of the order from your perspective?
I think if folks have any suggested edits or examples for the guidance that you want to send along to us, please do. Those are always really helpful as we go through and try to revamp some of these examples and what we've put in there. So feel free to send any suggested changes, or if you'd like to see, lists of, or if you have examples, just like these are the kinds of engagement activities that we would think about doing, or that we've seen, or anything like that is really helpful.
Awesome. Okay, anything else for OWEB?
Just appreciate the work you guys put in putting this together.
Well, thanks.
Yeah, that guidance is a lot of work.
Yeah, it's been speaking personally, it's been a fascinating experience, and made much richer from great folks such as yourselves. So thank you. Okay, so we're at 11. I would say just look for a scheduling meeting doodle poll from us at some point here in the very near future, and enjoy the rest of your Friday and have a great weekend.
Thank you. See you
Thanks,
later.
everybody.
Goodbye.
Jesse,
Thanks,
hope you feel
everybody.
better.